The use of sudden cinematic shocks to frighten audiences became widely popularized during the late 1970s and early 1980s. While early instances of this technique existed in older cinema, the modern formula was truly solidified by iconic slasher films of this era. John Carpenter's masterpiece, released in 1978, along with the standard-setting summer camp horror flick from 1980, changed the landscape of the genre. These films masterfully manipulated tension by using rhythmic editing, eerie musical cues, and unexpected visual reveals to catch viewers off guard. The immense box office success of these projects proved to Hollywood that brief, intense bursts of adrenaline were highly profitable, which rapidly turned the mechanic into a staple of mainstream horror cinema. But was it actually a good thing? Jump scares did not entirely ruin horror, but their excessive overuse changed the genre by replacing psychological tension with basic physical reflexes. When overplayed, a jump scare stops being an artistic tool to deliver terror and instead becomes a cheap, loud trick that disrupts immersion and leaves audiences irritated rather than genuinely frightened. A biochemical reaction caused by a jump scare triggers a primitive, evolutionary fight or flight response when the human brain interprets sudden loud noises or rapid movement as an immediate physical threat. This ancient survival mechanism instantly floods the bloodstream with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, bracing a person to either confront danger or flee from it. This internal alarm causes an automatic physical spike, showing how easily our biology can be manipulated by basic sensory triggers without our conscious control. Because this sudden explosion of adrenaline is entirely a biological reflex rather than a deep emotional experience, it results in no lasting fear. The dramatic surge in blood pressure and heart rate fades almost instantly once the conscious mind realizes that zero real danger exists in the room. This leaves behind absolutely no psychological depth or lingering unease, allowing the viewer to return to a completely calm state within just a few moments of the shock. The total absence of enduring dread is why relying strictly on these loud shocks to terrify an audience is frequently compared to the tickle effect. Just as tickling a person forces an involuntary physical laugh without actually being witty or funny, a cheap jump scare forces an automatic bodily startle without offering any genuinely frightening narrative or atmosphere. It relies on a mechanical loophole in human anatomy rather than creative storytelling, making the final experience feel unearned, hollow, and ultimately frustrating for the audience. Releasing tension too early undermines the core foundation of a great horror story, because true terror relies entirely on a slow-burning buildup of atmosphere, dread, and a persistent sense of impending doom. When a filmmaker inserts a sudden shock before the environment has had time to properly fester in the mind of the viewer, they prematurely empty the reservoir of anxiety they spent minutes constructing. This impatient packing denies the audience the agonizing experience of waiting for the unknown, substituting a potentially profound psychological nightmare with an immediate, temporary distraction. Constant scares break the packing of a film or game into predictable rhythms, trapping the narrative inside a repetitive cycle of deep silence followed by a deafening audio spike. Once an audience deciphers this mechanical formula, they stop engaging with the actual story or characters and instead start calculating the exact seconds until the next loud noise. This predictability transforms a supposedly terrifying journey into a tedious exercise of rhythmic waiting, completely draining the experience of any authentic surprise or artistic spontaneity. This predictable pattern creates an unintended safety blanket effect that works directly against the goals of the genre. Once a major jump scare finally occurs and the loud noise echoes out, audiences often feel an immediate sense of relief and physical safety because they know the hidden threat has revealed itself and will not strike again for a while. This emotional reset effectively kills the ongoing suspense that a horror piece should continuously maintain, granting the viewer a comfortable breathing room that breaks the illusion of constant danger. A narrative crutch becomes apparent when poorly written horror scripts use loud audio stingers to compensate for a severe lack of compelling monsters, weak plots, or completely uninspiring settings. Instead of constructing a sophisticated narrative that naturally frightens the audience, filmmakers use these sudden audio blasts as a shortcut to simulate an emotional reaction that the story itself failed to earn. This reliance on cheap tricks exposes a fundamental weakness in the creative writing, using a sensory assault to hide the fact that the underlying film lacks any real substance or genuine substance to keep viewers invested. Directors frequently rely on the fake-out trope to artificially inflate the tension, orchestrating cheap setups like a harmless cat jumping out of a dark closet or a bathroom mirror cabinet closing to suddenly reveal a smiling friend. While these moments successfully startle the viewer for one brief second, they quickly exhaust the patience of the audience because they offer absolutely zero narrative value or real danger. When a story repeatedly cries wolf with harmless everyday objects, the viewer becomes entirely detached from the experience, feeling manipulated by a predictable gimmick rather than engaged by an authentic threat. Modern ear-splitting audio design further highlights this creative bankruptcy because many current jump scares do not even feature scary imagery, choosing instead to simply max out the volume to startle you. This aggressive technique turns the cinematic experience into a physical punishment rather than a creative design choice, as the audience is forced to endure painful decibel spikes that harm the ears rather than stimulate the imagination. When the only terrifying element of a horror film is the literal volume of the speakers, the art of filmmaking has been entirely replaced by a cheap acoustic assault. Ultimately, the over-reliance on these cheap cinematic tricks has fundamentally altered the landscape of the genre, shifting the focus from enduring psychological craftsmanship to brief physical manipulation. When horror relies strictly on automatic biological reflexes, predictable rhythmic drops, and punishing audio blasts, it surrenders its power to truly haunt the human mind. True terror is found not in the sudden, ear-splitting explosion that forces a one-second gasp, but in the quiet, suffocating atmosphere that follows a viewer all the way home. By moving away from superficial shocks and returning to the art of slow, burning dread, storytellers can resurrect the deep, lasting fear that makes horror a timeless art form.